Okay.
Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Irish Academy of Management event. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Margaret Heffernan from DCU, and I'm the current Vice Chair of the Irish Academy of Management. This is our second distinguished international scholar event. Some of you might have been at last year's inaugural event with Professor Tom Coken, Professor of Work and Employment at MIT Sloan School of Management, which proved a huge success. You're very welcome to view this event on our IIM website and read the teaching note linked to the talk in the Irish Journal of Management. Before we get started, we've got a lot of events in development for 2022, which we'll be sharing with you over the next few months. This includes our PhD Writer Retreat series, which continues, and our annual conference, which will take place in Trinity Business School under the co-chairs Dr. Nafu and Dr. Paul Ryan. The theme for the 2022 conference is Re-Energizing Management for a Greater Future. For full details of the conference, you can go to our website, and the call for papers will be out soon, so please link into our newsletter, website and Twitter pages. And before we kick off, I'd just like to thank Growth Hub WIT School of Business and CTEL for hosting the event. We will have a Q&A session at the end, but by all means, pop questions into the chat, and I'll revisit those questions in the chat box once Felicity and Helle are finished. Today's event is our second Distinguished International Scholar event, and we're absolutely delighted to welcome Professor Helle Neergaard, Professor of Entrepreneurship at Aarhus University. I'll hand you now over to the very able hands of Professor Felicity Kelliher of WIT, who will introduce you to Professor Neergaard and lead the conversation. So over to you, Felicity.
Thanks very much, Margaret, and thank you most sincerely to Helle for joining us today when we'll speak about educating for entrepreneurial action and on an educator's journey. I had the privilege of meeting Helle about 10 days ago, and it was a fantastic opportunity to really speak to her about the topic today. So I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Professor Neergaard is one of the world's leading scholars of entrepreneurship. Her areas of expertise include entrepreneurship and education, new venture establishment, and entrepreneurship and gender. Entrepreneurship known globally for her 2 handbooks on qualitative methods in entrepreneurship, alongside numerous international publications. She received the prestigious Sten K. Johnson European Entrepreneurship Education Award in 2018. Helle is Professor of Entrepreneurship at the Aarhus School of Business and Social Sciences, Aarhus University in Denmark, and she's currently head of the ITIM section in that university. Thank you so much for joining us today, Helle. Personally and professionally, it's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss your entrepreneurial educator journey with us.
And I'm so delighted and really honored to be given this award. It came out of the blue, so I'm really, really pleased. So thank you very much for giving me the award.
Well, we're more than delighted, Helle. So to begin our conversation today, it would be really great to hear about your journey as a person. Can you talk to us about your background, and in particular, what were the major influences in your professional journey to date?
Yes, well, today I think, most people say, oh, you need to plan your career. I never planned to be an academic. It was never in the cards. My mother was a dental nurse. My father was a self-taught businessman. For them, although I got my A-levels, going to university, that was not something, there was 3 things that I could become. I could become a nurse, I could become a secretary, or I could become a teacher. And I guess, yes, I did become a teacher, but not the kind of teacher that they had probably envisioned. And it was actually my mother-in-law who introduced me to the idea that a woman could do a lot more than people thought she could do. So one could say I kind of followed in her footsteps rather than my parents' footsteps. So I did a PhD in international business, and I got interested in small business networks at that point. And then I got hired as an assistant professor into a project that focused on networks in the IT and biotech industries. And what was of particular interest after we'd done the first kind of interviews in that project was that there were very, very few women. Given my at that point my ideas that women could do anything, I thought this is really strange. I need to dig into this. And I think about that time, I then met a second very major influence on the career path, and that was the Diana Network, which was started by 5 American professors. And I was, for some reason, invited to be part of their starting the network in Europe. So we were a bunch of young women researchers who met up in Stockholm, early 2000s. And then it just kind of went on from there. I started building a network, and then my kind of that kind of paved my way for my research into women's entrepreneurship.
That's fantastic, Helle. Sorry for interrupting you. That's really fantastic to hear the journey and how much of your heart is in your research. And it would be really helpful to hear a little bit around the research that you achieved, or the research grant that you achieved back in 2011, and how that started to build into your research trajectory in terms of entrepreneurship education.
Around 2010, the Aarhus School of Business, which I was employed by at that time, was merged with Aarhus University. And we were some entrepreneurship is a really interesting field in that in the early times you had 1 or 2 scholars who were interested in entrepreneurship in a department, and that was it. So you were very much alone, and you had to kind of find people to play with outside the university, internationally in your network. But when we merged with Aarhus University, we suddenly became a bigger group, and we started looking at what are we interested in together. Because we had various perspectives. My specialty was gender, and others were looking at other research topics. So what would bring us together so that we would get to know each other better? That was really the exercise. And we thought, well, what we are all interested in entrepreneurship education. We are all interested in making good entrepreneurship education. And we are all interested in doing different entrepreneurship education to what was, being pushed forward at that time, which was very much business plans, right? The first course I was asked to teach was, well, can't you teach the students to do business plans? And I said, no, I can't. If I'm going to teach this course, then I'm going to teach it my way. And at that time, they didn't have anybody else. So I said, okay. And then I ran that course for about 8 years in the way that I wanted to, until they discovered what I was doing. So under the radar. But that was really, finding something that we were all interested in. And then there was a strategic window. Because the Danish Strategic Research Council had a call out, which was about entrepreneurship education. So we thought, well, let's try it. And we tried in 2011, and we didn't get the funding, but we got a lot of good feedback on how to improve our funding bid. No, that was 2010. So 2011, we tried again. And then we actually received the funding, which was approximately 7 million euros. So quite a big grant to investigate, what, how can we produce good entrepreneurship education? And I think I can safely say that all the articles and books that have been produced since then, they have come out of this project in some way. And we have developed on our thinking along the way. And we are still being critical to mainstream entrepreneurship education, preferring to figure out new roads and trying to think, how can we, in the best possible way, introduce entrepreneurship to students so that they don't think, well, this is not for me, but that they'd rather buy into it.
Really interesting, Helle. When you think about that first research and what it has spawned in terms of perspective, what is it about entrepreneurship, the way that you're following it, that allows that mindset, that entrepreneurial mindset, to come to the surface?
I think what frustrated us to start off with was that the focus was not on the person. I think you have to understand that around this time, about 2008, Sarah Saraswati came in with all her effectuation thinking. And that actually played right into our to our playground, because there was a focus on the person. And I know that Bill Gardner back in time said, who's the entrepreneur is the wrong question, but we actually don't think it is. Our position is that the individual has to play together with the opportunity, like Shannon Venkatraman, that we have this individual opportunity nexus, but there's been a lot of focus on the opportunity side, but not so much on the individual side. So our focus has been very much on what are the characteristics of these people, or qualities, because we're not thinking in terms of traits here. We are thinking in terms of that young people are socialized in a certain way that either prepares them for or hinders them in taking on an entrepreneurial journey. And I guess that part of this thinking is actually also linked to my research in women entrepreneurs, because this is where I have very much heard the stories that, well, if that is entrepreneurship, then this is not for me.
Oh, interesting. And particularly, I think that's really interesting through the gender lens, particularly when you spoke there of the potential for female entrepreneurs. What are the kind of things in terms of the individual that you've studied, or what are the kind of things that you found regarding individual perspectives and how that feeds into the potential for greater numbers of entrepreneurs?
Well, some of the things that we can observe around women entrepreneurs is that they don't grow their businesses, right? Okay. Or rather, they don't grow them in the way that our societies expect them to. So they don't found empires in general. Of course, some do, but a large proportion, they don't want to have these huge businesses to run. But it doesn't mean that they don't grow. They just choose to grow in a different way. First of all, if they do grow, they grow in what I would call, or they follow the small steps principle. which means that they want black figures on the bottom line before they take the next growth step. And then they don't want venture capital, because venture capital means that you have to give up control. And they prefer not to give up control. I guess you can liken it a bit to, you know, that the business is actually the baby, right? And you don't sell part of your baby. You prefer to keep it and see it grow and nurture it and give it the food that will make it grow in a good way, and follow it, and then maybe when it grows up, you will hand it over to somebody else, but you want to follow it in the whole process, and you want to do this in a sustainable way. So women are often blamed for not growing their businesses, but they are actually growing them. Another way that they're growing them is that they collaborate. Right. So when they get a huge project, they don't actually hire people, but they go out into their network and see, who in my network can help me solve this project or fulfill this project. And then they collaborate with these people until the project is completed. And then next time, they'll perhaps collaborate with other people, or maybe some of the same, but they have this group of people where they can, or individuals where they can just choose who is good for this project. And I call this the pizza principle. So you share, they share the pizza, right? Rather than building empires, and it creates a lot of flexibility. It also means that you are less vulnerable. You may not have to lay people off if you don't get the business that you expect. So the women actually do these things. It's strategic, it's rational, but it's invisible.
Interesting. In terms of that journey of the potential for half the world's entrepreneurs to be female, but also through that education lens, your recent papers on existential learning have been very well received at the 3E and ISBE conferences over the last 12 months. Can you tell us a little more about this concept?
Again, I'm actually also borrowing here from my own learning path, because an important element in existentialist philosophy is the capacity to change, and existentialism is very much about how we as human beings relate to the world, and it emphasizes the individual as a free agent who can determine his or her own development. And for a long time, when I presented work on entrepreneurship education, I talked about this existential backpack that all students bring with them into the classroom. Students have a backpack usually when they go to class, which contains all their books. But this backpack that I'm talking about is about all their learning. And whenever you encounter an experience, whether good or bad, you take away learning from it and you put it down into your existential backpack. And when you encounter new learning, you maybe bring up some of these experiences and comparing them with the new stuff that you are encountering and saying, okay, well, I handled that challenge at that point in this way. This new experience tells me that maybe I should alter my ways of doing it, or maybe I should continue doing things the way that I do. But what happens also is that we get very set in our ways. So we may not think about that we have the capacity to change, or that we could change. And recently, I revisited Simone de Beauvoir's work. She says that humans are products of past choices, and present choices can change us, but this process of change takes place slowly because it has to be authentic, meaning that it should be in accordance with the values of the individual. And she also talks about a concept that she calls sedimentation. And sedimentation is, I don't have a glass of water, but if you imagine a glass of water, and you have a handful of soil, and you put this soil into the water, it will settle, and the heavier parts of the soil will settle on the bottom, and the lighter parts of the soil will settle in layers, right? So that to me, that kind of reflects the ideas of the mental backpack that we carry around, and that there are things that are more difficult to change. They're the bottom layers, right? We can more easily capture the top layers than we can the bottom layers. And I think that it's an important task for us as educators to try and help students who may not think of themselves as entrepreneurs or as potential entrepreneurs, to understand their capacity to change. And I think that's the first thing that we have to focus on before we start teaching them all the skills and all the knowledge about and for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's so vital for the individual themselves to see their own capacity, as you say, to change and grow and potentially be an entrepreneur. Could you talk to us about both the challenges and opportunities of carrying out research in this area?
Yes. I think the biggest challenge is that we are researching our own practice. Mm-hmm. And how do we do that in a way so that it is still seen as a valid way of creating knowledge? Anybody would say, well, if you're writing about what you do yourself, it's subjective. So we could talk about autobiographies. We could that's a very subjective way, or also ethnographies, but the whole ethnographic idea. So one way that we met this challenge in the PACE project was actually to employ a couple of ethnographers who kind of followed us around as educators. But obviously, that's expensive, right? And as an ordinary educator, you can't, without a bag of money from a funder, you can't actually do that. So it's a huge challenge how we can present what we find as, and it often becomes, patting ourselves on the back, and we are so good at what we do. So we also have to kind of try to be critical of what we do, and try and understand what does it do to the individual student, at the same time as trying to report what it is that we do and what it is that works, right? So we have to look at both what works and what doesn't work.
Yeah, really helpful. And any challenges around the ethical considerations of studying individuals in this way?
Well, obviously, with all the GDPR that we all have to meet at the moment, there are lots of challenges, again, in being transparent, because your participants might not necessarily want to be named. You can't store the data on who they are and their process. One exercise that I usually do with the students is to ask them to record good and bad things that have happened to them during their lives. I use Stern's Damasio's talk about stars and black holes. And I ask them to articulate these experiences. And obviously, if I wanted to use that as data, I would have to make sure it was anonymous, and I would have to formulate it in such a way that they could not be identified. But a lot of this information is really individual, right? So you might have to change some of it quite a lot, and then you would, of course, also would be changing what you write about it. So your output, your findings, and that does not go well together. So you have to find ways of reporting that will both be true to what you find, but will also not expose the people who are actually participating.
That's such a delicate balance in reality, isn't it? I've had the pleasure of knowing you on the page far longer than when we've met recently, but I've known you on the page for far longer, and including your work in qualitative research as guidebooks or as texts to help us as qualitative researchers. So thank you from myself as a qualitative researcher. But in the context of what you've spoken about, can you talk to us about what attracted you to this research method?
Well, basically, I think I'm not so much an economist as I'm a humanist. So I actually started out my career in the humanities, and I think that has also colored my way of viewing the world. So I'm very much a people person rather than a numbers person. So I can understand the numbers, but I actually prefer to work with people, and particularly people's history. Again, probably inspired by my own life journey. I think that, you know, what colors people in life are their experiences as they grow up, and these, you know, experiences, even though they have taken place maybe 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, they actually still govern the way that we deal with life today. So understanding, you know, what actually goes on with, for example, women not founding businesses and women not being in tech, you know, that's long-term consequences, right? So if we want to change that pattern, we need to look at what has happened in the past, and then maybe actually start there. So it's this interest in people that has brought me to the qualitative, and here, you know, I'm coming towards the end of my career. You know, doing life history analysis is really what's making, you know, keeping me interested at the moment. I used to do case studies and mainly qualitative research in those terms, but you know, I'm developing more into the more narrative traditions today. And one of the things that actually triggered me and my interest in qualitative methods was that I was, when I did my PhD, that was one of the particular things that the committee praised me on. was my account of sampling, which of course then has led. I've written a small booklet in Danish. That was the first, and then there is the chapter in one of the handbooks. And I realized that if we, as qualitative researchers, were going to make headway into the more, into the journals that were more dominated by quantitative research, then we would have to try to be much more transparent and systematic in what we were doing. And we needed to be able to tell the convincing stories about what, how we had gotten to this data and how we had treated it. So at that point, I developed a passion for helping young researchers in becoming much better at arguing their choices. And that's one of the reasons why I've been running the ECSB doctoral workshop for the past, I don't know, maybe 12, 15 years.
That's really helpful, Helle. And, thinking about our future researchers or our researchers that may be here with us today and or listening in the future, what advice would you offer those newer researchers entering this area of qualitative research or indeed entrepreneurial research?
That they would have to think very carefully about every single step of their research journey and be able to argue it sufficiently. I tell my own students, you always have to ask yourself why. Whenever you do something, you have to ask yourself, why am I doing it in this way? So always question your own motives. So that it doesn't become a question of, well, this was the only way that I could access the data. Well, that's probably not a really good argument. If you are going to be assessed on your choices. So finding objective arguments for why is this the best? And there are always, in my experience, there are always, good arguments why you could do it this way, right? So easy access can be translated into network-based sampling, right?
Yeah.
And you can argue that you need to use network-based sampling because these people are not accessible in any other way. Because they could be sensitive, people in some way, or there's some other reason. So you always have to try and argue why you do things in certain ways.
And that's really helpful, and that you're not apologizing for choosing the method, but justifying its optimum use.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that in the educational setting, so we've spoken a little bit about the challenges around carrying out this kind of research in the educational setting. But what are the things that we could be studying in this setting in relation to entrepreneurship? What are the gaps that we could now be looking to in this setting?
Well, I think there is a trend at the moment towards critically evaluating what we are doing and is whether it's the right approaches that we are actually using. We have a tendency to adopt American approaches to teaching entrepreneurship and to forget that in Europe, we are very diverse in terms of culture, and also our institutional systems are very different to the American ones, and also internally in Europe, there are very different institutional systems, and they affect how and what we teach. and how and what we research. So getting away from the Americanized way and providing a critique of, you know, what we do, I think could be one direction. And obviously, you know, at the moment, my own work goes in the direction of, well, where are we philosophically? And there, I think we need to be very careful that we don't reinvent the wheel, but that we look to the educational field to see, you know, what is going on there, what has gone on there, and also, since we are talking entrepreneurship, I think there's also a lot to be said about borrowing from psychology.
Okay. In what way?
Well, if we talk, for example, self-efficacy has found its inroads into entrepreneurship education, right? Everybody's measuring self-efficacy, right? But there are a lot of other elements of psychology that we could borrow from, and some of those are also linked up to learning. For example, there's a guy called Frick who writes about significant learning experiences and the impression that those make on us. And I tend to use that when I design my education, so that for each module, I need to have a significant or design a significant learning event, so that the students will remember this.
Almost like
and learn from it.
Almost like a critical incident, almost.
Yes.
Almost
Yes.
like
Yes.
That's really helpful. So it starts to embed in their mind's eye the potential for entrepreneurship in themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Hugely helpful. And if there were those here today or listening in the future that were contemplating entering the world of research, so they're not researchers yet, but they're thinking about maybe that doctoral journey, what advice would you give them in this area of entrepreneurial education research?
Follow your heart. But that would be my recommendation, you know, at any point. But you know, as a young doctoral student, you have a specific amount of time in which you have to complete your PhD. You can't complete a PhD that you're not passionate about. So make sure you choose a topic and a way to complete your PhD that retains your passion. And then you can't help but succeed.
That's really, really helpful. Before I ask you the final question, you told us a story when we first met you just this afternoon about the photo behind you, the photograph.
Ah!
Could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I was very struck by what you had to say.
Yeah, everybody can see the poppies, right? And you can also see the tall poppies. And in my experience, if you stick your head out too much, you get it chopped off. But you have to persist, right? So for me, being a gender scholar in Denmark, it has been a challenge. Other countries, it's maybe not so much, but in Denmark, you know, it's taken for granted that everybody is equal. There's still some that are more equal than others, right? And definitely so in research, and doing gender research. Is that really necessary? One could ask in Denmark. So that's, I experience that a lot. So I stick my head out, and yeah, I sometimes get it chopped off, but you can't let that stop you. You just have to find other grounds where people appreciate what you're doing. And this is what you have done here. And I'm hugely grateful for that.
No, it's a fantastic story, and a photograph of your own as well. It's nearby your home, which is a lovely connection. You're a lady after my own heart. I think maybe we'll accept the tall poppy risk. I'm very sorry to say that we're reaching the end of our conversation, so as to give the audience a chance to ask questions. But before we end, is there any final thoughts you'd like to share with us before we give the audience a chance to ask questions?
Oh, I think I have said most things that I wanted to say. Yeah, just no, do the research that you feel passionate about, and then just let it take you where it wants to. Don't let anybody tell you what you should or shouldn't do, because that's not the way we make new, interesting research. And I think there's too much of the same. So we need to make our own profiles in the research world, and not be afraid to try and forge new roads.
I think that's massively helpful, because it's the only way progress can occur as well.
Yeah.
Margaret, if I could hand it back to you, and if there are questions from the floor.
Thanks very much, Felicity, and thanks so much, Helle, for such a really interesting and insightful talk about your journey into entrepreneurship research. So I suppose the easiest way is if anybody wants to put their hand up and ask a question. Hopefully I'll be able to see you. I can just call your name out. I know that Neve has a question here. Any particular advice on research methods for studying potential entrepreneurs once they have completed their education?
Well, I would say we really need longitudinal research. A lot of educations are evaluated on whether they can make students become entrepreneurs. But there is research that shows that there are, even though students become entrepreneurs, quite many of them actually close down once they complete their studies. What I think could be hugely helpful is actually doing research on student cohorts, and doing it 5, 10, 15 years ahead, because a lot of students will want to have experience in industry before they take the leap to become an entrepreneur. They will have the experience, they'll maybe have saved some money, they have built networks. So a lot of the elements for starting a successful business, you don't actually have them when you're a student. So doing longitudinal research would help us map out, what actually goes on. And obviously, this also involves, some of the life story narratives, right? What happens in this process. And for women entrepreneurs, if I think of them, well, there is this whole thing about having children. What happens around that? We know about the research on mompreneurship, but there's a lot more that we don't know. And women are starting a business late in life. When kids have left home, because that's when now they have the time, they have the money, they have the experience, or they want to say to their employer, good riddance. Now I can actually go on my own, and I can do things better. so this whole journey, we are missing that. Can't hear you.
Right, thanks, Helle. Aniv, were you asking a question? Sorry. No, just Nilufer has a question around doing a participatory research. Is it okay to check at one phase the entrepreneurial attitudes while doing pure business research? Especially when you mentioned psychology should be part of studies in entrepreneurship.
Could you repeat that?
So doing a participatory research.
Yes.
If you're doing participatory research, is it okay to check at one phase the entrepreneurial attitudes while doing pure business research? Especially when you mentioned psychology should be part of studies in entrepreneurship. Nilufer, if you want to unmute yourself and
yeah, and maybe elaborate.
Hello, Dr. Helle. Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to ask this question. Well, I am doing participatory research, but at one phase, I was interested to check that what would be the attitude of entrepreneurs towards certain technologies. So, and I'm very happy that you mentioned about that we should be taking psychology in entrepreneurship studies. So would that be okay, at one phase, which is, my research is purely business research. So, but at one phase, we are checking entrepreneurs' attitude, being the participant of the research.
I would say that would depend on why you would want to do it. Okay, this is asking yourself the question: why is this interesting? Yeah. Why is it necessary? What will I get out of it? What is it? What is it really that I'm looking for? So asking yourself, okay, why am I doing? Why would I want to do this? What is it that the outcome that I want? So if you can argue that through,
yeah,
then there should be no problem.
Yes, thank you so very much. And it's actually one of the objectives of my research is that I want to see the participation of people into technology, rather technology for itself is a technology, and they're adopting it. So their say is important for the technology implementation.
Yeah, and I think I would not well, one thing is being interested in the attitudes, but another thing is being interested in why do they have these attitudes, right?
Oh,
I would always try to dig one step further down, because asking for their attitudes actually, to me, just touches the surface.
okay.
I would be interested in what has happened in order for them to take on these attitudes.
That's great. That's and I will definitely add this point as well, because it would help me to understand more that why they are doing this and what could be the outcome of that. Thank you, Dr. Helle.
Helle, we have a follow-up question from Neve, and then I can see that Brita has her hand up as well. So, Neve, do you want to ask your question if you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm looking at institutional entrepreneurship through the eyes of PhD education. So I have, I'm really lucky I have access to this program that I'm taking myself. So it's a mix of ethnography and auto-ethnography as well. Yeah. I'm doing interviews, but something I'm kind of concerned about is how exactly do I go about following up after that program? Because I am looking at follow-up interviews, but again, after the PhD, and like you said, it could be 10 or 15 years until they maybe set up their own business. Yeah. But with institutional entrepreneurship, this could be just introducing something within the organization that they go into. But I won't be an observer anymore.
About institutional entrepreneurship, would they be making spin outs, or what kind of, what are they actually doing?
It will be more so instilling kind of new beliefs or ways of doing things within an organization or sector. So for example, they could go into business. It's similar to entrepreneurship in a way, but it's more so around the values. See, the program I'm studying is interdisciplinary and intersectoral, so they're working loads of different kinds of people.
So values are some of the most difficult things to change in people, right?
Yeah.
They are really deeply embedded. They're kind of, in the glass, they're kind of at the bottom of the sediment, right?
Yeah.
so you would be interested in knowing what are their values today, and have these changed later on?
Yeah, and kind of, do they change the values or the way their organizations see things? So, for example, my own background, I have a background in international development. And when I went into business, I had very much a social science side to me as opposed to a management or business side.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if the students in this program, is there a way that I can actually study that change in the organization? Because I feel like interviews, you can gain insights from them, but they can be quite hard on themselves, and PhD students, like, they're some of the most critical. They don't have a lot of confidence, but maybe their employers might see it. But I don't know if employer interviews
I'm wondering
could
if
be
you want,
risky.
if you want to understand things that people may not actually talk about, or may find it, they don't come up. I'm wondering if that would actually come out if they were discussing with their peers.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking maybe a focus group interview where they were discussing more freely with regard to values, would tease out some of the stuff that you were interested in.
Yeah, I was thinking of a focus group summer of next year, because the program finishes up in February this year.
Yeah,
Or,
obviously
well,
you will have to design it very carefully.
Yeah.
So that you are asking the right questions at the right time, and not kind of putting words into their mouths.
yeah, exactly. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thanks, Neve. See, Brita has her hand up.
Great, thanks, Millie Margaret. Hi, Helle.
Hi.
Thank you very much. A lot to learn from you, as always. 2 or 3 questions, maybe I'll keep it to 2. So looking at the conversation, that's there in that whole area of entrepreneurship, and people invariably go back to, it's about the enterprise. What can we do? What research can we do that starts to change the narrative, and that people stop having the association with an entrepreneur being somebody that sets up an enterprise? I mean, I look at someone like yourself and Felicity, who talks about, putting the poppy up and high, and taking the risk of getting your head chopped off. To me, that's being entrepreneurial. And quite often we're starting off conversations in other contexts, and we have to face the barrier of the assumption is it's about an enterprise, so I don't even think I'll join in this conversation type thing from people. That's one question. What could we do? Maybe I'll go on to the next.
This is the whole idea that this is not for me. And I think we often see that for women. When I give talks at workshops or seminars for women, I tell the stories of the ideas that growth does not have to be, it doesn't have to be rocket growth. You don't have to have venture capital. So I'm telling all those unusual stories, and what tends to happen is that the women come up to me afterwards and saying, I have felt wrong for so long. Thank you for telling us this, because now I feel I belong. So I think we have to try to puncture the myths around what is real entrepreneurship. And I know that Colette Henry is with me on this, because this is not about fixing the women. We need to try and fix the system. And part of fixing the system is to try and make the system understand that just because women do things differently doesn't mean that they do them wrongly, right? That men and women choose to do things differently. That doesn't mean that the men are wrong, right? And the women are right. It just means that we make different choices. And the reason why we make these different choices is because the way our sedimentation has settled, because we are raised in different ways. And we can't go back in time, but what we can do is, as women, we can think about how we raise our daughters. So that I wrote a paper at one point that I presented at ISBE called Learning to Climb Trees. That later became published in iGebra as something else. But basically the idea is that if a boy climbs a tree and he falls down, he's generally being patted and say, okay, well, go out and climb the tree again, right? And if the girl climbs the tree and she falls down and hurts herself, you know, mommy will cuddle her and say, oh, well, maybe you shouldn't be climbing trees because you could hurt yourself. And I know that I'm caricaturing things here, but it kind of eases the understanding. So telling our girls stories about successful women, showing them that we are successful women. You know, I started out by talking about my mother-in-law and how she had been an inspiration to me, because she left her husband and sons at home while she traveled the world as an SOS nurse, you know, picking up people who hurt themselves around the world. So she was often not at home. So I have actually never felt guilty about all the traveling that I've been doing while being a researcher, because, you know, that's a possibility, right? I've missed my kids, yes, but I've not felt guilty. And as women, we are very, very good at feeling guilty. And we are also very good at making other women feel guilty. So rethinking how are we going to, you know, make sure that our daughters and the coming generations are lifted rather than pushed down or held back. And we can do this throughout education. And I know that there are things happening at the moment because there's a huge focus on, you know, how do we get more girls into tech, right, in the STEM area. And again, I would say it starts early. It starts in maybe not kindergarten, but at least in primary school. And I know that the reason why I never studied anything to do with math was the math teacher that I had in 7th grade. So he killed the joy of math. But I also know that my daughter loves math because she had a teacher who was wonderful at making her reach her full potential.
Thanks, Helle. I'm just aware of the time, and there's I know that Margaret has her hand up, but there's 2 questions that are in the chat, and I don't know, Adadeo, whether Helle's last answer might have answered your question in terms of just going back to capacity building and development of potential in women entrepreneurs. Besides the academics, educators, and researchers, do you think other members of our society also have roles to play in this?
Absolutely.
I think you touched on a few.
Yeah, I also think that that all the business advisors and those organizations that support women entrepreneurs, they have a huge role to play. But I think that the most important thing that we can do is actually ask the women what they need. We are very good at being experts and thinking that we know what the women need, but we are very bad at asking them what they do need. And it's only through dialogue that we are actually able to develop the best programs for women. Michael Quinn Patton has written a book on developmental evaluation. And I think there are some really nice suggestions in that book on how you can actually do research into action and evaluate what happens along the way, and co-create the research with the people that you are working with. And this also plays very much into the engaged scholarship conversation that's going on.
Thanks, Helle. And Suzanne has a question. I'm interested in entrepreneurship education for undergraduate health professionals. The curricula for these programs are governed by professional bodies and tend to be very busy and filled curricula. Would you have any advice as to how the importance of entrepreneurship education could be sold to those who may be in a position to change curricula?
I think that's a very, very difficult question, Suzanne. We are experiencing the same here. I don't have a solution. I have to say for that problem. I would say piecemeal. Sneak it in the back roads. Doing it under the radar to begin with, maybe create some workshops, extracurricular workshops that students can follow on the side. And once these are very successful, the students will start talking about it, and then those in charge would be persuaded through the students. I think we have here actually to use the students. So the demand this is a supply and demand question in reality, that we can't supply things that are not in demand, so we have to create the demand among the students for this. And how do we then create that demand? And that needs a lot of thought. But one way could be to start small things. It could be 5 o'clock go home talks for an hour with entrepreneurs that are good role models for that particular area, but realistic role models. Not Bill Gates or Steve Jobs or somebody like that, but somebody that your target group can relate to.
Thank you, Helle. I'm just aware of the time, so we might maybe have one final question from Margaret, who's been patiently waiting. If you want to unmute yourself, Margaret.
Thanks very much, Margaret. And thank you, Helle. I have been listening to the advice and the answers you've been giving there. And I'm very interested in some of the suggestions. So I'm in a position where I'm supporting entrepreneurial potential across a campus. I can see that the whole area of female entrepreneurship has developed in the last 10 to 15 years. And I suppose just in light of your experience, could you, I suppose, just let me know from your experience, would you recommend that higher education institutions, in providing an ecosystem to support entrepreneurship, should look at developing female-specific targets at, for undergraduate students?
Yeah, that's a big yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know that it's been very problematic discussion here in Denmark, because the women see it as a stigma. Why should we need special education? But once we put it in place, they flock to it. So that's really interesting, right? That on the one hand, they say, no, we can't have that. And on the other hand, they kind of, come in big hordes once we offer it. So yes, definitely.
Yeah, because I did a little bit of research in that area, and that's exactly what I had picked up on. That sometimes the women themselves can shy away from it. So yeah, I just wanted to test the water.
So maybe trying to sell it that everybody actually needs a little bit of extra attention. And if it was kind of a different minority, maybe we wouldn't be so scared. So why are we scared just because we're talking about women? That's also always my question into this. You know, why is it that the minute we talk about women, we shy away from doing what would be best for them, and what would give them confidence, really? You know, because I think a lot of the reasons why we are seeing women shying away from entrepreneurship is because they think it's not for them, because they have to become a man in order to become an entrepreneur, and they don't really want to do that.
That's great. Thanks very much. I suppose that's a nice ending to what has been a really interesting talk. So my thanks to you, Helle, for sharing all your interesting insights into the area of entrepreneurship teaching and research.
And if anybody wants to get in contact me later, they're very welcome to.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks to those of you that asked questions and who attended. Thanks again also to Felicity for being such an able chair. Hopefully, Helle, we will get to maybe meet you and have proper chats and face-to-face when we're
I hope so too.
Be lovely.
And thank you, Felicity, very much for giving me this opportunity.
It's been a pleasure. I'm on behalf of the Academy. We've been delighted to have this opportunity to have the conversation with you today, and we'll follow up with everyone if there's anything you need. Really appreciate it, Helle, and it's been such a pleasure preparing for today. I will look at my painting at home of the poppies in a completely different way from here forward.
Every time we see Poppy, Helle, we'll think of you.
Yes. And thank you, Margaret, for getting us through this in such a good way.
Thank you. So I think, Felicity, there probably will be a recording of this up on at some point.
What we have done in the past and what we hope to do again this year is not only to have the recording, but to prepare the conversation as a special paper in the Irish Journal of Management, which will be accompanied with a teaching note with the potential for us to use it in the classroom or further afield. So we'll follow up with you on that, but the recording will be available through the Irish Academy of Management as well. It's been a pleasure seeing everyone today.
Thank you. And again, just a thanks to Growth Hub, WIT School of Business and CTEL for their help in hosting the event. Thanks again to Helle and Felicity. And hopefully see you again at some of our other Irish Academy of Management events that will be taking place over 2022. And as I said, the IAM conference is taking place in Trinity, so I know full details can be found on our website. So thanks again, and hopefully see you at our next event. Take care.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Helle.
Yeah.